Today we're going to talk about how to design a small space container garden, whether it's a balcony like mine, or whether you have a courtyard or a patio garden. My balcony garden is in Manchester, UK. My garden is in zone 9A. If you are a balcony gardener, one of the very first things that you need to do is think about the weight limit. So what I would advise is that you speak to your building manager and find out how much weight your balcony can hold. If we look across the city, there are all sorts of different balconies, different lengths, but actually the balconies over there were essentially clipped on to that building, whereas mine is concrete. So mine can hold the same weight as my front room. So if you're wondering how I've got 3 ponds on here and all of these containers, that is the reason why. This is not a point that you can just disregard, because as you can see, you have all of these containers on a balcony. You have to think about how heavy that compost is, but also how heavy your containers are, especially if you're using terracotta pots like this. And then on top of that, when you water, it becomes even heavier. So you really need to figure out your weight limit from your building manager. I cannot stress that enough. Now, I have a phrase called "be for real." And this is something that I need you all, whether you are a beginner gardener, whether you think you're experienced, whether you are experienced, I need you to have this phrase in mind, because this is something you're going to use all throughout the season. Be for real. What do I mean by this? Essentially, when I say be for real, it means that we have to have a reality check here. I'm going to put a pin in be for real now, and we'll go to the next step, and then you'll see what I mean. One of the other most important factors when it comes to designing a space, no matter if it's a balcony or a ground level garden, is you need to know how much sunlight your garden gets. And the direction that your garden faces is going to impact that. So for example, if you have a north facing garden, that will mean that you are predominantly in shade. So you might get a bit of sun in the morning, but in the afternoon, not so much. Whereas if you have a south facing garden, you might not get any sun in the morning, but then all evening and afternoon, you'll get full direct sunlight. So for example, with my garden, the sun comes around here, around about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then slowly makes its way round, and then round about 9 p.m, the sun sets around about there in summer. Now, unfortunately for me, this building are brand new, and so that has now blocked the amount of sunlight that I get. So my garden this year is going to be very different. So this is going to be a challenge that I'm going to have. So why is it important to be for real on this point? Well, in our minds, we might see Facebook or Instagram and see all these amazing gardens and think, okay, I want to replicate that. Or I've seen what Jason's got growing on his garden, I want to do that. Well, I've just told you that my garden is south facing, but if you've got a north facing shady garden, the plants that I'm going to be using are not going to be the plants that are going to work for you. In which case, you need to be for real and actually have a reality check and think about the right plants for the right space. And it can really suck because you may have this vision of all these amazing things, but that's just not your reality. But that doesn't mean to say that your garden has to be boring if it is shady. So throughout the season, I'm going to also be showing you what plants to get to make sure that your garden, even if it is in shade, can be exciting and cool too. Your garden is its very own microclimate. You could live in a building like mine, and a garden below me could have a completely different microclimate to the one behind me, facing the other direction. So you need to take a bit of time to actually learn your space. And this sounds so corny, but it is so true. So I'll give you an example. Because of this building here, when the sun goes behind, that casts shade onto this garden. However, when this building was not here, it was full sun all the way around. So I learned that this area here, although it is completely messy now, used to be the hottest part of the garden. And over there used to be the shadiest part of the garden. And that's why when we get closer to here, you'll see that I've got things like spinach here that prefer shade. So if you're a brand new gardener, there's quite a bit to learn. You're not going to get this all in your first year. It's going to take some trial and error, and that's completely okay. Some things are going to work well, some things are just not. And that leads me to the next point. A lot of gardening is trial and error. I don't think I've ever met a gardener who can tell you that they know absolutely everything. Every year you learn something new. And sometimes you will buy or grow plants and they just don't work well in a space, but you could move them 1 meter down the garden and actually it works fine just there. So try not to take things to heart. That's part of the fun of gardening. If you have a small space garden, one of the biggest cons is that it is a small space. So in order to maximize your garden, you need to look for opportunities. One of the best opportunities to maximize your space is to go vertical. One of the best examples of vertical gardening on this balcony are these arches. I have several videos on the arches, but there are pros and cons. Yes, I'm maximizing on space and being able to grow a lot more up the arches. But on the flip side to that, I've got the wind that comes barreling through, and actually a lot of plants struggle on there. Another example of vertical growing is this trellis. So right now I have some passion fruits on there. They've overwintered. It doesn't look great, but believe it or not, it is alive and it has crawled itself over onto the arches too. You can see just how much it has grown all the way onto the other side. Vertical herb towers are another fantastic way of adding in a bit more height. This has 12 slots on here for vertical growing. I'm going to be replacing everything in here this year. I'm growing quite a lot from seed, so that's going to be quite exciting. And then I have something like this. So this is a raised bed. I don't think I've shown you guys this, but this is a 3-tier system and you can change the configuration to however you want it. But again, it's a great way to add some height into the garden. And that one back there is over here because that is the shadier side of this garden. So I grow quite a lot of my leafy greens on here, and by putting them over there, it stops them from bolting, which basically means it stops them from flowering and going to seed. When your leafy greens like salads go to bolt, the leaves can taste really, really bitter, and essentially you can't use them or you can't eat them. So by having these greens over here packed up nicely, essentially I have 3 sets of containers that I can then grow and use for leafy greens. So I've yet to clear up this side of the garden. I've only made it halfway down, but you can see what was growing here. So I have chilies, I have peppers and tomatoes. Now the reason why I was growing these plants here is because these all love direct sun. Because I know my space, I know that this is the warmest part of my garden and the part of the garden that gets the most sunlight. So that impacts what I plant and where I plant them. So when you begin to follow all of those steps that I've been talking about so far, it helps you to plan and create planting zones. So for example, I'm sat here at the very end of my garden. Here is a sunny area. So I've got my sun-loving perennial veg here. I have floral perennials all down the front that require full sun. Same for my window boxes. On the arches, I will have flowers that really enjoy full sun going up the arch. And then, if I look down here, for example, this is normally covered with Malabar spinach. So I've got lots of cover there. That planting then creates shade here, which allows things like these carrots to grow. because the carrots don't enjoy being in full sun, or they will also bolt and go to seed. This half of the garden prefers shade. So I have my woodland zone here. So all of these plants here in this section could be found on a woodland floor. With the herb tower, normally I have sun-loving herbs at the front and then shade-loving herbs at the back. And then I have plants like this verbena, and this verbena got so tall, in fact, she's almost as tall as me. But having the verbena there almost acts as a barrier, so you can have different zones. So in the height of summer, this whole section is pretty secluded, and that's a seating area that I can just enjoy. So I've created a different zone there. Then I have the woodland zone, and then down here I've got the fun-loving, sun-loving perennial zone. Now, these are all principles that garden designers use when they are designing huge gardens. It's the same thing, but we just need to kind of narrow them down and put them into a smaller scale to make it worthwhile for our container gardens. The largest expense on a container garden is most likely going to be the containers themselves. Now, over the course of the next week or so, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks to cut down the prices for containers, but also give you an idea of the type of containers that you should get for your space. There are lots of things to consider. So I'm going to do a separate video on that. Something else to consider when you are designing your space is what is the right type of plant for your space. So for example, if you have a north-facing shady garden, one of the best plants that you could invest in are things like ferns and grasses. If you have a sun-loving garden, you might want to think about perennials like salvia, lupins, rudbeckia. They all do super well in a south-facing garden. If you are in a particularly rainy area, there are some plants that actually really prefer some damp soil. So there's all sorts of different things that you need to consider when it comes to planting. And this is where, once again, you need to be for real, because if you start buying what it is that you want to buy because you've seen it on Instagram, that may not necessarily correlate with your wet, soggy, north-facing garden. Once again, I'm going to be making videos showcasing the right plants for the right space. So don't worry, I can't show you everything right now because, you know, it is still March, so there's not much available in the nurseries. But as time goes on, I will promise to show you the right plants for the right space. And then the second biggest expense on your garden will most likely be compost. Now, you want to get yourself a peat-free compost. However, there are some issues with peat-free compost, and especially on a balcony garden, it can be a challenge, and that's due to moisture. I'm going to be doing videos in the next couple of weeks showing you how to make your own compost. I also have a Bokashi bin for those of you who don't have outside space to make your own compost. You can order a Bokashi bin, which essentially is a home composter that creates a liquid fertilizer. Compost that I really would recommend is Dalefoot compost, and this actually has sheep's wool in it. The sheep's wool is really great for moisture, and it helps it to not dry out quickly. Let me know if you'd like a follow-up video on that, and I'll happily do one next week. Okay, you guys, we have covered a lot today. Don't worry, don't get overwhelmed. One of the easiest and best things to do is to draw out your garden and then figure out all of these spaces. Don't worry if you don't hold yourself to it, because we're still gardeners after all. I hope you found this useful. If you have, let me know in the comments below, and I'll make sure to do videos on every single thing that we've talked about today. Hopefully, I will see you all again very, very soon. Bye. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for sticking around. If you'd like, take a photo of your garden and then send it into my Facebook Balcony and Container group. I'll leave a link in the description box below. See you again soon. Bye!